We move on to the closing plenary of the summit, requesting all participants to please be seated for the session on enabling collective action for a sustainable future. I welcome all our distinguished speakers of the session to the dais, please. I now call upon Ms. Seema Arora, Deputy Director General, Confederation of Indian Industry, to initiate the session. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Shombi Sharp, UN Resident Coordinator India, Mr. Vineet Mittal, Chairman CII Task Force on Green Hydrogen, Co-Chair CII Renewable Energy Council, and Chairperson Avada Group. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the final session of the 18th Sustainability Summit. I'm really delighted to have with us two very, very important distinguished panelists who would, of course, very shortly give their thoughts on how they see the next year or so going forward and how can we enable collective action for a sustainable future. The valedictory session, basically, we try to give also a snapshot of what has happened in the 1.5 days for the benefit of the dignitaries who may not have been able to give time for the last 1.5 days because we have, had them over only for this session. So I think for the benefit of everybody and for especially Mr. Sharp and Mr. Mittal, I would just like to share some key highlights. So we have had over 150 national and global speakers speaking to us in the last 23 sessions over the last 2 days. The speakers were from 12 countries, of course India, but also France, UK, US, Canada, Israel, Netherlands, among others. We've had sectors like FMCG, automobile, manufacturing, infrastructure, IT, all covered during this deliberations. In addition, we had a very, very interesting set of participants, almost 400 over the 2 days. And we also had 160 B2B meetings over the 2 days. So that is what has really happened in terms of the numbers. And I really want to thank all of you and also our partnering organizations for making this happen. I think without them, we would not have been able to make this happen. So like I said, we had almost 150 eminent speakers. And out of this, 29% were international speakers. And we had nearly 30% women speakers. So we ensured there was also proper diversity in the deliberations. Now you've all seen the program. We had a lot of areas covered, including climate was a big area that we covered, circularity, resource efficiency, ESG, MSME, value chain. We also looked at various sectors like mobility, the freight sector. We looked at air issues. We looked at plastics. We looked at nature conservations to remind of the few other areas that we looked at. So while the diversity of the sessions was a lot, and also we had very, very thought-provoking sessions, what I've tried to do is I've just tried to put down maybe 5 key points from and these are very high-level points. It's very hard to, summarize or try to put out what was discussed in terms of the rich panel discussions we had. But I've tried to just put out, and it's not really a summary. It's really an overarching, macro level, I would say summary, which is just for us more to think through and say, how do we take this forward in the coming years? So while, like I said, we had lots of conversations on net zero and accelerating transition, what came out really, and one of the points that stood out strongly, I would say, is that transitioning to net zero is important, but we also need to do it with economic viability and while ensuring that it is a just transition. What was mentioned was that people are at the center of this transition. Therefore, the pace and scale of the transition needs to take into account the needs of people. And what are these needs of people? These are livelihoods, these are water, food, nutrition, education, and many other things. And all of these things are actually at extreme risk due to the climate vulnerabilities that we are facing. So this is what is important that came out, and people being at the center and looking at all these from a point of view of how do we make sure that people feel secure as we are going through this transition so that they also participate in the transition. And when we say people, it's not just community, it's people who work in business, people who take decisions, people who make policies, everybody included in that. Now, there are many global frameworks talking about the transition. One of the things that came out was there is need for localization on these global frameworks because local needs can be different. We are doing this particular, and just as a reminder, we are doing this summit, 18th Sustainability Summit, as a B20 official event. And as CII, we have the B20 Secretariat. Mr. Mittal also has been leading some of the discussions there, co-chairing the Energy Climate Change Resource Efficiency Task Force. And I think what came out in many of those deliberations also is that South, the global South has a very different context than the global North. And therefore, localization, again, is a very important thing. Industry also needs to play a role, and of course is playing a role, but needs to establish adaptable models that take climate risks into account. They're starting to do it, but really the point is that there is more action which is reactive rather than action being proactive. So the industry needs to do this more proactively. And they must also look at how they can work together in an interdisciplinary approach to make and contribute to policy frameworks, to program frameworks, which can lead to customization adaptation capacities being built into different stakeholders. Because we need to build adaptation capacity, but it also needs to be customized to the stakeholder needs. And for this, you need an interdisciplinary approach. You need multiple stakeholders actually working together and saying, how do we make sure that you have created the adaptation capacity which works for the stakeholder that we are targeting. Another very big theme is MSME. You see, no transition can be complete unless we look at a transition from an MSME lens. I mean, I always worry a lot that we are seeing a lot of action from big businesses, which is good. That's not a worry. It's very good. But the worry is that it should not stay only at the big business level. It needs to really percolate to the value chain. And we had good discussions around value chain. And again, many, many very good perspectives came out. I think one of the things that got picked up was that the transition of the MSMEs needs to be really supported by building collaborative partnerships, and there's need for more capacity building across all the stakeholders. And that also, MSME is a very big part of it, so capacity building of MSME is important. How can we do this actually? One of the thoughts that come is that it's time for businesses to actually create opportunities, interventions, and actions that integrate MSMEs into their own sustainability strategies and targets. So when businesses actually make sustainability targets and strategies, they think about themselves. I'm going to be net zero. I'm going to do, renewable energy by this 2050, or I'm going to be, making sure I recycle more or reduce plastic by so-and-so date. Do they actually integrate and think of the opportunity that the MSMEs have in this particular change or this goal setting that they do? So it's about time that we started to think about that in a more diligent manner as businesses. Not only, what this will lead to is that not only would this support an inclusive and sustainable growth, but it will also allow all stakeholders, large and small, to align to regulatory frameworks. For example, frameworks on ESG, for example, frameworks on EPR. It will also allow them to identify the gaps and then build resilience, which is what the capacity building is all about. Now, the ESG theme also was very prominent. And of course, what came out was a feeling that there's an overemphasis on the E part of the ESG. We all are always talking about the E part, environment, because we understand that much easily. And that's often at the cost of overlooking issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the DEI agenda, which needs to be integrated much more. So if there is to be effective ESG implementation, again, a collaborative ecosystem that has to be built that allows all stakeholders, again, typically large industry, MSME, government, and government also as the largest procurer, right, can also integrate ESG into their ethos and functions. And the large industry stakeholders really need to lead the way, mentor the value chain partners so that they can participate in this ESG journey. Otherwise, there's a danger that they'll be excluded, they'll be out of business, and then this transition is no good for anybody. I already mentioned capacity building, but there was again a very strong theme coming out on resilience and capacity building, which came from the point of view that sustainability at scale can only be achieved through interconnected efforts and knowledge exchange. So interconnecting, sometimes we will silos. We work on areas of, let's say, air pollution without understanding what are the climate benefits of that, right? Similarly, we may be working on, ESG without understanding that how ESG can also help in the climate transition. So there is a need to look at the interconnectedness, and more knowledge exchange in the form of capacity building is what is required. Finally, I think I would say that financing, which always is something that is important and everybody knows that. One thought that came from the financing discussion, which may or may not have been discussed earlier, is that, of course, enabling private sector is key in this entire journey. And for doing this, we need to improve the risk-return nexus and not only focus purely on the financial concern when we do this risk-return nexus, but we also need to consider what we all know, the geopolitical, social, and climate adaptation issues. That was something that also came out. So these were the 5 key messages, broad messages. I'm sure I have not covered everything, and I'll apologize for that already. But it's not possible, as I said, to cover all this various thoughts and very rich inputs that we got from all of you. I must say the participation from the audience was also tremendous in terms of giving us ideas. So thank you for that. As the Center of Excellence for Sustainable Development at CII, we'll of course see how we can build on these key points to create an action plan and work with all of you again to implement it. I'll also now, look forward to listening to our speakers who will bring further insights, and hopefully they can also comment on some of these points as they take stage and give us their insights. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for listening to this.
I'd request Mr. Shombi Shah, UN Resident Coordinator India, to please speak a few words.
Thank you so much, Seema. It's a pleasure and honor on behalf of the United Nations here in India, and as representative of the Secretary General to join all of you, to be here with all of you, to see such a fantastic group of different stakeholders, businesses, government representatives, civil society stakeholders from so many different countries. Mujhe aap sab se milkar bahut acha laga. For those of you who are not coming from afar, it's a real pleasure to be here, to be taking part in this 18th Sustainability Summit, the closing plenary, and to appreciate the organizers, the B20 and CII, for putting such an important, timely emphasis on the SDGs, on sustainability, and the role of business. I think, dear friends, it's no secret that as we approach the halfway mark to the 2030 Agenda Sustainable Development Goals, that we are far from where we need to be. And in fact, we're in crisis. We're in a polycrisis, the midst of a polycrisis, a new word that emerged in the last year. That is challenging the ability of countries and communities to cope. No longer are we talking about rates of growth in terms of sustainability and human development, but we're actually looking at losses. We're looking at, in some measures, the Human Development Index, other measures of years of progress being wiped away, or forward movement being stalled. In fact, if we look at the global SDG targets, 150 targets, only 12% are actually on track. So that's a very small amount. This comes from the latest Secretary General's report. More than 50% of the targets' progress has slowed, and 30% completely stalled or even gone into reverse. So we can't really underscore enough the criticality, the urgency of the situation. And this runs across the gamut, from poverty alleviation, hunger alleviation, to mitigating the devastating impacts of climate change, of climate boiling, as the Secretary General says, because we, humanity, continue to wage war on the planet, and nature is striking back. And I think if you just open the newspapers, you see that the world is burning, literally, at the moment. Here in India, of course, it's a hot climate. I grew up in Kansas City in the United States. It's not a cool climate, but somehow one has the popular imagination that it should be warmer in Delhi than in Kansas City, and yet I can tell you at the moment that's not true. You look at California, you look at Hawaii, you look at many, many places across the globe. Nobody is exempt from this crisis. And so the world is coming together in a few weeks' time in New York for the SDG Summit, for a global stocktake, the most important stocktake that we have had as a global community since 2015, when the SDGs were launched. And the timing is incredibly important in terms of the role of India's G20 presidency, because we see literally a handshake. The Leaders' Summit here on 9th and 10th will happen just 8 days before those leaders of G20 and then the rest of the world come together in New York. And we are so appreciative that India has worked so hard to put the SDGs and to put the voice of the Global South, the development needs, at the core of the G20 dialogue, to remind the world that the impacts are asymmetrical. Absolutely, we need green transitions, and this is what we're all about. But as you mentioned, Seema, then they must be just green transitions, just in the sense of fair and accounting for the inalienable right, the human right to development, and recognizing that it is the poor communities and countries who did the least to cause the problem that are paying the highest price at the moment. We're thankful to the Indian G20 presidency for putting so many issues at the forefront: women-led development, the importance of gender equality, digital public infrastructure, digital public goods, and the role that those are having, and the need to dramatically increase financing available to developing countries that are drowning in debt crises. And in fact, the financing gap to achieve the SDGs has grown considerably, now something like $5 to $7 trillion annually. But we know that that money exists. You see it. When the priority is there, the money comes. And so this is a collective effort. The investments needed to close this gap are enormous and vast, but they are there. But it is also clear that business, the private sector, business will be the answer. These resources exist for the most part, across the world in business, in companies, in firms, micro, small, medium, and gigantic. Business is the engine that will deliver the 2030 agenda, and that's the point of this conversation. Business in partnership with communities, in partnership with governments, in partnership with multilateral organizations. And we've heard, and I've been informed that, and we just heard a short recap, that over these last 2 days, we've had very important deliberations on going far and unpacking many of the details of how to move from ideas to action on circular economies, on resource efficiency gains, on these global transitions to net zero, emerging technologies, digital drivers for sustainability, ESG, value chains, renewable energy, water scarcity, and on and on and on, green mobility, climate finance, resilience through nature-based approaches. This is all incredibly exciting. So we do have the answers. We do know what we need to do. That is the good news. The challenge is just making it happen and working together with governments. And here again, I would say that India, we recognize the government of India's incredible efforts to raise the incentives to work with business moving forward in renewable energy in particular. You look at solar, you look at biofuels, you look at green hydrogen, electric mobility, electric vehicles. I don't think there's a country around where there's more exciting movement forward in terms of investments in renewable energy, business and government coming together than here in India. And if the role of businesses cannot be overemphasized, then of course neither can the business case for sustainability. This of course is the win-win, because sustainability is good business. And it's about redefining and reimagining shareholder value, that it cannot be only measured as a simple arithmetic, supply, demand, profit, bottom line. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here with this, but rather it's a holistic composite of environmental value, of social value, strategic integration across the SDGs. And this is what more and more the world has come to understand. And this is what is so exciting, that the sustainable development models that we are helping to unleash through discussions and actions like these 2 days can open up enormous amounts of new value, upwards of $12 trillion, and create 380 million new jobs by 2030. This is what we certainly need here in India to leverage this incredible demographic dividend, one of the most amazing human resource opportunities that any country has ever had over the next 2 to 3 decades. India at present has the greatest youth generation any country has ever had, more young minds to tap than any country has ever had, if given the opportunity for good, decent jobs. And the returns on these investments generated by implementation of the SDGs could be, it's estimated, upwards of $30 billion or more additional per year. We look at layers of that: gender equality, empowerment of women. In India alone, the economic impact of achieving gender equality is estimated to be a potential $7 billion to the GDP by 2025. So we speak about demographic dividend, but we speak about the gender dividend as well, being incredibly promising. So that's why, all of this is why we in the United Nations so much prioritize true partnership with the private sector. The old days of thinking are long gone. That we know that it is you, it is business who will deliver, at the end of the day, what we all need, the future we all need. So we have the UN Global Compact, of course, the world's largest corporate responsibility initiative at the global level. We have the Global Investors for Sustainable Development Alliance, bringing together investors around these issues. At country level across the world, we're engaging closely with businesses, private sector. Here, for example, there's so many exciting partnerships. I won't go through all of them, but just to give a taste, we're working with UN Environment Program together with Renew Energy and Save a Self-Help Group on a fantastic program to train women in Rann of Kutch engaged in the salt pan industry, train them to be solar engineers, to help provide human capacity, for example, repairing solar panels and things, to meet this incredible growth in the investment of solar energy here in India, and provide poverty alleviation along with it, and tap the potential of gender equality. We're working, UNESCO is working with the Taj Hotel Group, for example, to tap the touristic power of intangible cultural heritage across the country. We're working with Lakme Fashion Week on the Circular Design Challenge, trying to build sustainability and circularity into the fashion industry's core business model. We have an SDG finance facility. We have an ethical tea partnership, and many, many other examples. So I won't continue and labor on that, but just to say, to conclude, dear friends, this is the topic of the hour. We are at the halfway mark. We are far behind. But with the power of partnership between business and governments, and the international community and civil society, we can get to where we need to go. We have the roadmap. The SDGs are there. ESG and many other tools to move forward fast are there. So let us all leave today armed with this renewed energy and renewed faith and the knowledge that we've gained from these 2 days. And remember that we have the power to shape the world. Definitely that is true here in India, but when you bring the whole G20 collective along, even more so. Let's embrace the spirit of the Indian G20 presidency, the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is one. Together, we will achieve. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for sharing wonderful insights. I would now like to invite Mr. Vineet Mittal to please share his valuable thoughts.
Good afternoon, friends. It's a great pleasure to address you all at CII flagship event, the 18th Sustainability Summit. Seema, I particularly want to appreciate you. Last time when you invited me for an event in Delhi, the hall was full with mostly women, and today you made me prouder by saying that you got 30% participant and speaker being women. So my sincere appreciation for your effort, for reflecting the desire of Indian industry to have inclusive growth and gender neutrality, and CII is doing a great job of making it happen. Today, for today's topic, we are all aware of pressing need to address the challenge of climate change and to transition to cleaner and more sustainable economy. This is a task that requires collective effort of all stakeholders, and it is the one which cannot afford to delay. We are seeing, as our previous speakers were seeing, the consequences of great heat in US, Europe, and natural disaster across all geographies. Earlier, it used to happen largely in global south. Now, no part of world is left with it. And it is more than vital that global governments and private sector work together to solve for such an huge task. And India itself is on path to become a 5 trillion economy by 2026 and become, depending on which report you are referring to, 7 trillion to a 10 trillion economy by 2030. India has put a renewed focus on growing responsibly, not because only world expects us to do, but this is what is natural culture of India, where we relate nature and divinity as one. And in our culture, we respect every natural sources of life. And India has set very ambitious target to actually by 2047, we want to almost 85% greening the grid. And in near future, we have revised our target from almost 175 gigawatt to 500 gigawatt of renewable energy sources by 2030, and which includes 280 gigawatt of solar, 140 gigawatt of wind, and recently pumped hydro, which is water batteries, have been added into the target to ensure the grid stability and round-the-clock availability of green power. So we will become one of the few countries in the world which will not be bothered by intermittent nature of green power. We are building solution which is local, which is based on the geological survey of India's geography, where we are blessed with abundance of sun, wind, and water, and various locations across the country where we can do pumped hydro project, which can provide power during the peak hour, but at the same time provide the stability to the grid and use solar and wind to pump the water during excess generation and do the optimal grid utilization. And in addition to that, to decarbonize the remaining 82% of energy sources, because this only addresses 18% of our requirement. But as most of you know that we are still grey fuel driven economy. To address that challenge, India has announced a very ambitious national hydrogen mission. It is supporting it through very positive policy, and the intent is that 25% of hydrogen used domestically turns green by 2030. And I think there is an important role which Global North can play in motivating country in Global South to do more faster energy transition. And one way to do it is to help them in two key areas. The first area is in the area of creating the marketplace, like green hydrogen, green ammonia, green methanol, SAF. They are relatively expensive for a growing economy like India to accommodate in large quantity. But if world is serious about its own goal, like for example, Europe is targeting 10 million tons of green hydrogen, which is equivalent to 57 million ton, or if you combine it with the green bunkering desire of Singapore and desire of Korea and Japan, through joint crediting mechanism of these countries, if they follow the spirit and what is legally enforceable in the COPs, or which is more commonly called the Paris Agreement, the COPs 21, which provides a framework to encourage global North to purchase the green products from Global South. And that is what will be a game changer. See, if you look at from the financing side also, you would be surprised to notice with all these big talks from multilaterals and World Bank, India almost funds 90% of its infra and green project locally. We don't go for global financing, or global financing in many cases are much more expensive than local financing. And we are truly blessed that we have a high saving economy, and even currently we save around 30% is the GDP saving rate, which provides the funding both on the debt side and local equity market, and our capital market is doing extremely well as well. So the way world should look at India is, today we are at 3.5 trillion, and we are still able to support such a steep target. Imagine when India will be 10 trillion and with 3 trillion odd saving, we will not be just be able to fund our own infrastructure and greening need, but we will be able to provide the capital for the global green growth. And with that kind of mindset in place, I think I would urge through all of you to the global North governments that they should institutionalize the proper framework of Paris Agreement and encourage Article 6 participation for green trade from global South to global North. And I think US, Japan, Korea, and 15 other countries under the IPEP platform is already making similar framework under Pillar 2 and Pillar 3. And those are very great initiative for global participation in encouraging greening of global North. And India has not just stopped at 100% of energy transition goal, but what it has also done is that it's incentivizing its citizen through lifestyle for environment. It's incentivizing every individual who want to contribute through a green credit program where you can plant few acre of trees and use it as a credit and benefit out of this. So India is going through a lot of nature-based solution through policy intervention, by incentivizing corporate, by incentivizing NGOs, by incentivizing individuals. Through that, India has also launched a program for local carbon compliance market, which will, once implemented, will also be a driver for the change. And Seema, I would like to share with you, and you'll be very pleased that a lot of large corporation, including my own company, Avada, is not only doing capacity building for our supplier network. Currently, we have 300 odd suppliers. And there are companies from 500,000 ton turnovers to companies in billions of dollars of turnover. And all our procurement has a point mechanism that if you are going for scope 1 and 2 and 3 compliance, what percentage of our purchase bill, if we are targeting, say, $2 billion capex next year, how much priority you will get compared to other. And I'm seeing that intent is actually getting more and more developed with the Indian business community, where they are realizing it's their responsibility not just to turn green, but help the entire ecosystem to turn green, because that's what is the right thing to do. And that's how we will be more accountable, not to just future generation, but current generation as well. So as Seema and Mr. Shambi said that both industry, businesses, and governments and the multilaterals all have a huge role to play to make sure that these kind of initiative which is taken by industry body, where they attract the global talent to come and debate and build a solution which can decarbonize, doesn't just remain the debate, but the takeaway point from such conferences are actually become part of the global advocacy and the global policy suggestion. Because once everyone starts talking about the framework agreement of increasing grain trade between global North and global South, it will bring more and more equality. And I think it will take us towards the world where economic growth, environment, and energy requirement can be balanced out. And that's what one of the reasons probably the government chose CII to partner for the B20 initiative. And through the B20, CII is playing a very vital role to advocate a lot of the areas where globe can work together and bring urgent action to ensure accelerated yet equitable transition. These area encompasses global cooperation, financing, resource efficiency, and just transition. And the committee which I co-chair, we have identified 3 major objectives. We must integrate and increase the share of renewable energy sources in our electricity supply. We need to mobilize demand for clean technology through incentive that encourages business and consumers to embrace sustainable practices, and must allocate financial resources towards achieving these objectives. The recommendation put forth by the task force are enhancing global cooperation to accelerate transition, improving access and quality of climate finances, just transition, energy security, energy access, affordability for all, nature positive transition that protects biodiversity, and finally circular economy and resource efficiency. B20 and G20 can play a critical role in accelerating global energy transition. Government, industry, NGOs, and citizens should work together to support the growth of renewable energy, carbon capture, battery storage, adoption of more green hydrogen, green ammonia, green methanol in all the hard-to-abate sector. And the theme of 18th Sustainability Summit is extremely relevant and important, not just from India. India is responsible for almost 3% of global pollution. But if you look at, as a citizen, we think we have the lowest per capita emission. And there should be an incentive framework which world should put forward for India to accelerate higher, greener transition. And the thought-provoking sessions which CII managed to create here by the global visionaries should be brought into the practice and policy making, not just in India, but across the globe. And thank you to all of you to actually participate and actively engage and contribute. And I hope you all will become ambassador for greener transition, greener planet, and being responsible towards not only communicating but living Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam philosophy, because eventually world can put restriction on human mobility through visas or boundaries, but on air and pollution there is no boundaries. And we all are equally responsible to make world a better place to live. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. With this, we conclude the 18th Sustainability Summit. I want to thank Mr. Shombi Sharp and Mr. Vineet Mittal. As Mr. Sharp said, business will deliver, and we do believe that business will actually be the main engine for delivering a sustainable future. He also said that business can bring ideas to action, and we had Mr. Mittal give us concrete ways of how those ideas can be put into action. So thank you very much, Mr. Mittal. And thank you for all the efforts made by all of you to be here for the 2 days. Thank you to all our partners. And I must say that while everybody said thank you to me, it's not me who actually delivers this. It's my incredible team which actually makes this happen. So thank you to all of them first. Thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you again next year at the 19th Sustainability Summit. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this we conclude the 18th Sustainability Summit. We thank our distinguished dignitaries and participants for your time and presence. We thank all our sponsors for partnering the summit. I request all the participants to kindly drop your lanyards at the registration counters so that we can reuse them for our upcoming conferences. Thank you.